Thank you, President Varner. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As our final speaker this morning, we are very fortunate to have a storyteller. Robert Wallace from Charleston, South Carolina is truly a raconteur. And while his storytelling is entertaining, this morning's is unique, and so for a combination of reasons. First, the story is rooted in Bob's deep understanding and appreciation of our history. It is told with the passion of a skilled trial lawyer, one like Bob, who served as Charleston prosecutor for many, many years, once prosecuting 3 jury murder trials in 4 days. His stories are always delivered in that eloquent dialect of the low country of South Carolina, reserved only to those born and reared there. The storyteller is one of us, himself a longtime fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. As we leave here today, his story, I think you will agree, will remind us of who we are and why we chose to become trial lawyers in the first place. Please welcome Bob Wallace and his wife Joy and their 4 daughters who are also with us today.
After hearing the fine speakers that you've heard yesterday and today, some of you may wonder how I got selected to be here. And I'm going to use a story to explain my presence. A lawyer was trying a case out of town, and one Saturday afternoon he called home to see how the family was doing. Little girl answered the phone. He said, "Honey, let me talk to Mommy." She said, "Well, Mommy's upstairs with Uncle Fred, and she can't come to the phone right now." He said, "Honey, we don't have an Uncle Fred." And she said, "Well, she said his name was Uncle Fred, and she can't be disturbed." Lawyer said, "Honey, why don't we play a little trick on Mommy and Uncle Fred? Go upstairs and knock on the door to the bedroom and tell her Daddy's home. And then come back and tell me what happened." Little girl came back in a minute. She's all out of breath and all excited. She said, "Mommy came running out the bedroom in her nightgown, and she slipped down and fell, and I think she hurt herself." The lawyer said, "Well, I'm sorry about that, but what happened to Uncle Fred?" He said, "Well, he gathered up all his clothes in his hand, and he ran and jumped out the window into the swimming pool. But he didn't know you drained all the water out the swimming pool, and I think he's dead." There was a long pause, and the lawyer said, "Honey, we don't have a swimming pool. What phone number is this?" Well, when I got a call about coming here to speak to you, I knew it was the wrong phone number. But I wanted to come to San Francisco, so I played along with it, and here I am. I am truly, truly honored to be invited to speak to the fellows in the American College of Trial Lawyers. You are the best of the best. the cream de la cream. But I hope you will never forget that the practice of law is not about file numbers or billable hours. The practice of law is about people, ordinary people for the most time. Many years ago, I was asked to represent an elderly Jewish couple who lived in Camden, New Jersey. They had only one child, a son, and he announced one day he was going to marry a Christian girl, and she insisted that any children they had would be raised as Christians. The Jewish couple were very orthodox in their view, but they readily accepted these conditions and welcomed her into their family. In due time, she had a little girl, and 2 years later, she had a little boy. Very shortly after the birth of the little boy, the father, their son, suffered a complete nervous breakdown, so severe that he was rendered totally disabled. His wife tolerated this a while, then they separated, and then they divorced. She remarried a fine Christian man who was in the military, and he was transferred to the Naval Weapons Station outside Charleston, South Carolina, in Berkeley County. And they moved to a small town near Moncks Corner, who's the county seat of Berkeley County. The grandmother, even though she did not believe in Christmas, every Christmas sent a Christmas present to each of her grandchildren. And every year on their birthdays, she sent a birthday card to each of them with a small check. And every year, the Christmas presents and the birthday cards were returned, unopened and unwanted. Once a month, she called a former daughter-in-law to see how her grandchildren were doing, and until one day, without notice, the telephone was changed to an unlisted number. After almost 6 years passed, their son was served with a summons and petition to terminate parental rights and to grant an adoption to the stepfather. The law in South Carolina is that after more than 6 months, with no parental visitation or support, the rights of that parent can be terminated and an adoption can be granted in the discretion of the court if in the best interests of the child. I normally wouldn't have been involved in this litigation, but the injustice of it appealed to me. And because the facts were totally without dispute, neither side engaged in any discovery. And I had a feeling my opponent didn't know about the conduct of the mother, so I had the grandmother bring all the Christmas presents, the birthday cards, and the phone records to the hearing in Moncks Corner. And of course, on cross-examination, I had a field day. After all the evidence was in, the judge said that he would interview the children during the lunch break in chambers and report his findings of fact on the record when we returned. After lunch, he said that the children were very, very bright and very well adapted to their circumstances, and they knew exactly what they wanted. They did not know their father, and they did not want to know him. They considered their stepfather their real father. They loved him, and they wanted to be adopted by him. I wasn't terribly surprised because I had interviewed the guardian, but it was the way the judge said it. It was his demeanor, the tone of his voice. He was telling me the case was all over. I looked over at my clients, and they wouldn't look back. Judge said the children wanted to hear the closing arguments, and they came into the courtroom and there was no objection. Little girl went over and sat by her mother. The little boy walked across the courtroom to our table, and he held out his hand and he said, "I want to meet my grandfather." I wished he'd have said, "I wanted to meet my father," but he didn't. My opponent did a really, really good job. He apologized for the conduct of the mother, but he said it really doesn't make any difference. We're not talking about 6 months here. We're talking about 6 years. Not one time did the father pick up the telephone and call his children. Not one time did he send a Christmas present, a birthday card, or $10 for support. Not one time has he attempted to visit his only children in 6 years. He said there's nothing left of this relationship but a very, very thin thread of paternity. As I stood up, I had this mental image of the judge reaching for a pair of scissors. And I said, the facts are not in dispute. This man is a good man. He loved his wife. He still loves his children. He worked every day of his life to support his family until one day the Lord himself reached down and touched him. And I don't know why he touched him, but he touched him. What I do know is this man did not abandon his family. His family abandoned him. I don't agree with anything my opponent said except one thing. There's nothing left of this relationship but a very, very thin thread. But oh, what a thread it is. That thread is long enough to reach from Camden, New Jersey to Moncks Corner, South Carolina. And that thread is strong enough. The little 6-year-old boy can walk on it all the way across this courtroom to meet his grandfather and to shake his hand. Whatever you do, don't cut that thread. About a week later, the judge called me and asked me to prepare an order for him denying the petition. I didn't hear any more from my clients for almost 10 years. One Sunday night, the phone rang at my home. It was the grandmother. I thought something terrible had happened, but she said, no, not a great deal had changed since she last saw me in Moncks Corner. She said she still sent the Christmas presents and the birthday cards, and every year they came back. Said she hadn't seen or heard anything about her grandchildren since that day in the courtroom until today. She said, miracles of miracles. Today our grandchildren came to see us. They want to get to know their father. They want to get to know their grandparents. They stayed all day. And when they left, they took all those Christmas presents and birthday cards. And they're coming back again. I just called to thank you. What a wonderful, marvelous judicial system we have in America. We have a system that has the means and the ability to resolve the most complex, factual legal issue that the human mind can present. And the simplest. We can determine the guilt of a man accused of murder and whether he will live or die. And we can determine whether that parking ticket you got last week is valid or not. We can determine who gets the custody and control of a multi-million-dollar corporation when the shareholders fight. And who gets the custody and control of a little 4-year-old girl when the parents fight? We can determine the rights and duties of citizens and non-citizens under our Constitution, under complex international treaties, under Geneva Conventions. And while only God Himself can create a baby through the magic of our judicial system and the laws of adoption, we can create instant parents for every unwanted baby in America. What a wonderful, marvelous judicial system we have. Is it perfect? No. It was created by man. Do we sometimes cut the wrong thread? Very, very seldom. But as every lawyer in this audience knows, the very heart and soul of our judicial system is the right to a trial by jury. So precious is that right that is guaranteed by our Constitution and by the Constitution of every one of the 50 states. It was even guaranteed by the Constitution of the Confederate States of America. But is it really guaranteed? And how did it all come to be? Winston Churchill said the 3 greatest documents ever written in our history are the Holy Bible, the Bill of Rights, and the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Now, I'm sure you all recall that in the year 1215, on the fields of Runnymede, King John and his army lined up to do battle against the combined armies of the barons. The barons demanded that the king sign the Magna Carta, or they would go to war. Now, the king didn't want to sign it, but he knew if he lost the battle, not only would he lose his crown, but he would also lose his head. And he signed the Great Charter, by which he guaranteed to every Englishman 63 enumerated rights. Number 39 is the right to a trial by jury. Now, there's a story in England that of all the rights that the king was forced to grant, the one that concerned him the least was the right to a trial by jury. Heretofore, if the king got really upset with you, he would have you arrested, thrown in a dungeon, confiscate your lands and your property, and that was usually the end of it.